So, the University of California at Berkeley has been accused of engaging in segregation after allegedly prohibiting white residents from using the Gill Tract Community Farm on Saturdays. This farm supposedly serves as a site for urban farming research and is part of the food justice movement, aiming to grow crops for healthy meals. Food justice, I mean, come on, guys. What a stupid concept. Essentially, the idea behind food justice, for those who don't know, is that somehow food, my friends, is inequitable in the United States, and we need this dopey group to teach us how to provide equal access to nutritious food for all people, regardless of race. I mean, how stupid can these people possibly be? Who is denying anyone access to nutritious food? What is this? Anyway, back to the alleged prohibition of white people from using the farm on Saturdays. According to the claim, this policy was purportedly intended to preserve the space exclusively for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. In other words, using one's race or skin color to exclude a group of people from attending. The allegations have led to a complaint filed with the U.S. Department of Education by the Mountain States Legal Foundation. William Trackman, the general counsel for the foundation, criticized the university's actions as systemic racism and akin to past segregation practices. He has also called for a federal audit of all UC Berkeley programs to investigate potential racial discrimination. So let's take a look at what in the world is going on here, and let's look at the New York Post, which posted an article about this. So here we go. Here's the article. This was published yesterday. And let's see. Here's what Trackman was saying about all of this. He said, UC Berkeley thinks that racial segregation is progressive now, but it's no different than segregation of the past. He said, preventing Caucasians from accessing Berkeley's College of Natural Resources farm on Saturdays is a clear violation of Title VI, which bars educational institutions from engaging in or allowing race discrimination. Obviously, right? The program was launched back in 2013, and the farm is a partnership between UC Berkeley and the surrounding neighborhoods. Students and faculty conduct urban farming research and grow crops to prepare healthy meals as part of their food justice movement, according to the farm's website. Now, the complaint includes an email from a farm program telling someone that Saturdays are exclusively for the minorities. And then it said exceptions have only been made for events that are minority-centered and with plenty of advance notice and planning. And went on to say, I trust you stand in solidarity with upholding boundaries around that safe and sacred place. Now, the article goes on to say that UC Berkeley are denying any knowledge of this because why would they, right? They even if they did, why would they admit it? And they said that these anonymous texts attached to the complaint have no specific information about time or place. And as you can see, the Gill Tract's website and calendar makes no exception or no mention whatsoever of any program or activity of the sort described in the complaint. And then the representative went on to say that having said that, the university takes complaints like this extremely seriously, and I can assure you that on Monday I will contact the appropriate people on campus in an effort to determine what the facts are. So that is exciting. And by the way, and as pointed out here, they went on to say that more college, race-conscious, and diversity, equity, and inclusion programs created to advance opportunities for Black students and other minorities have come under legal scrutiny amid complaints they amount to reverse discrimination. Let's make a correction here. There is no such thing as reverse discrimination. There is just discrimination. Period. Racism is racism is racism. Doesn't matter whether you have the power of the federal government behind you to be racist or not. It's all one and the same. So I have to ask here, what is it with this obsession by modern day leftists and socialists, or so-called progressives, if you will, with creating segregation for people? Why is it that we just keep seeing this time and time again, over and over again? It's always segregation, segregation, segregation. These people just seem hell-bent on creating anti-white spaces. Now, those who wish to defend this racist practice try and push the narrative that it's just a misinterpretation and or a misrepresentation of what is really happening here. The argument is this, that this is different compared to past American segregation because in the past he was legally enforced discrimination against African Americans and other non-white populations, denying them equal rights and access to public services, education, and economic opportunities. While in contrast, modern initiatives that revolve around creating spaces for minority groups are typically voluntary and aim to provide support and empowerment with a broad context of promoting diversity and inclusion in society. People like these lunatics in Berkeley will argue that it is not what you think, my friends. No. These initiatives do not seek to exclude or discriminate against white individuals or any other group in the way that historical segregation policies did. They're only excluding people and putting down Caucasians voluntarily. Like that makes a difference. It's still racism. See, rather than pushing to just treat everyone equally and the same, these people who have been indoctrinated are insisting to continue their segregation and separation of people of this country, which only ensures that our society will forever remain balkanized. They are creating perpetual anger and feelings of resentment from anyone who is excluded. That's just how this works. You'll never be able to achieve a lasting peace if you're constantly segregating people. The modern day so-called progressives, however, they just don't want to stop. They keep pushing the phrase marginalized, for example, to describe minority groups. And this term is used as a way to justify the sick ideology. Why, if you've been marginalized, well, then we must fix that, right? And they claim to just want to use the segregation to foster understanding, healing, and empowerment, rather than promoting division or segregation. And yet their actions serve only to create resentment, anger, and division and segregation. Which perhaps is the real purpose behind their actions here. And don't get me wrong, the useful idiots, these indoctrinated students, the millennials, the Gen Zers, that have been indoctrinated like this, most likely do really believe that their actions are somehow going to bring about this utopia of equality, right? I would say that in college, it is quite arguable to say that critical thinking is dead. So perhaps we can't be too surprised at what we're seeing here. But the teachers and those who influence them, surely they know that what they're doing is inherently evil. They can't be that stupid, right? I mean, we can see this push to indoctrinate fresh young minds with hate ideology, like that of critical race theory, which, by the way, is a 40-year-old indoctrination tool that has but one real purpose, and that is to separate and divide. I want to show you this. This was from an article published by the BBC 3 years ago. And in it they said, I'm taking a segment from their article here, they asked third graders to label their own power and privilege in an identity map. And at least 30 schools have recommended that students should read this Not My Idea, a children's book that called Racism a White Person's Problem, and we are all caught up in it. And the author, by the way, confirmed racist Anastasia Higginbotham, has argued that any place where there are white people has violent white supremacy embedded into it, and is not shy about labeling her discussions on race as critical race theory. Now, this kind of racial ideology I find personally nauseating. And it's never ending with these people. But see, that maybe that's the point. The progressives, the socialists, the modern day left have as a party always been steeped in racism since its founding. So let me back this up. Let's take a step back into US history and examine this sordid, dark history of the classic Democratic Party. So we'll start with early history and slavery. The Democratic Party was founded in the early 19th century, and during its early years promoted themselves as the party of the common man. Among its main core tenets was the opposition to the abolition of slavery, and was the dominant party in the southern United States, where slavery was most prevalent. The Democratic Party's defense of slavery led to a split during the 1860 election. This was the crucial election that would lead up to the Civil War. You had Southern Democrats. They nominated John Breckinridge, who supported slavery in all territories. In other words, screw the free states, let's make them into slave states. And then there was Northern Democrats, which nominated Stephen Douglas, who believed each territory should decide for themselves the issue. Now, this would usher in a new era, where the very first Republican was elected to president, and that was Abraham Lincoln. Now, the Democratic Party, having lost to the Republicans, whose primary goal was to end and stop the expansion of slavery in the U.S., and of course, the eventual abolition of this evil practice, the Democratic Party decided, nope, not going to allow that. And they were so determined to preserve their slavery for themselves that after losing to the Republican Party and to Abraham Lincoln, they seceded from the Union, which eventually would lead to the Civil War, where many hundreds of thousands of Americans died. Finally, to put an end to this practice. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, perhaps this would then put an end to this dark chapter in the Democratic Party's history, but you would be wrong. No, sadly, this would not be the case. After the Civil War, the Democratic Party opposed the Reconstruction and the Republican Party's efforts in support of black civil rights and political rights. The left, even though they'd been beaten soundly in the Civil War, were not content with allowing the black community to become equal to them. And so, one by one, they took steps to make this a non-reality. They started off by identifying themselves as the white man's party and used intimidation tactics, including violence and the formation of the KKK or the Ku Klux Klan to suppress black voters. The KKK was founded by Democrat Nathan Bedford Forrest. It was a military force serving the interests of the Democrat Party, very similar to the SA of the Nazi Party, otherwise known as the Brown Shirts. This would be followed by the Jim Crow laws, which enforced racial segregation and were enacted by white-dominated state legislatures in the South and supported by the Democratic Party as a whole. So, you might be asking then, what about the civil rights movement and the so-called party realignment? So let's talk about that. You have the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It is a landmark piece of civil rights and labor legislation in the United States that outlaws discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It ended unequal application of voter registration requirements and racial segregation in schools, at the workplace, and by facilities that served the general public. The Civil Rights Act was initially proposed, by the way, by President John F. Kennedy, who was then subsequently assassinated. And so after his assassination, this is where you get Lyndon B. Johnson, who would go ahead and continue the push for the Civil Rights Act. However, the Democratic Party was not in support of this universally. And so they ended up needing bipartisan support. And the Republican Party was crucial in making this a reality. Because at the time, the Democrat Party as a whole was still steeped in its systemic history of racism and racial discrimination. And they had a strong contingent from the southern states, many of whom were still opposed to civil rights legislation. So they then approached the Republican Party to help mend the fences and to help make this or turn this into a reality. And the Republicans then would play a crucial role in this happening. Now, at the time, the Republican Party was much more unified in their support of civil rights legislation. And you could see this in the final vote. So, for example, in the Senate, 82% of Republicans would vote for this act, while only 69% of Democrats did. And in the House of Representatives, again, 80% of Republicans supported the bill compared to 61% of Democrats. However, historically, everyone would focus on this being a Lyndon B. Johnson bill, and because he was the man and because he was a Democrat, the credit for the Civil Rights Act would go to the Democratic Party. And, the idea that, hey, they've reformed. But did they really? Well, history shows us that the Democrat Party has never really truly veered away from its racial focus. It just evolved in how it did it. Rather than truly hearing Martin Luther King Jr.'s plea to see a day where his children would be judged by the content of the character rather than the color of their skin, we see the modern-day Democratic Party, the modern-day left, the progressives, the socialists, who are still constantly fixated on skin color. They can't move on from it. Which then takes me back to UC Berkeley and the lunatics there that are promoting racial inequality. You would think the legacy of evil would cause those who practice this hateful rhetoric to self-reflect on their actions of continuing to promote such injustice. But maybe that's the point of all of this, these indoctrinated people. They are so blind by it. They are so blinded by their educators, so filled with this hateful ideology that they can no longer see what is so obvious in front of them. It's almost a religion to these people. You can't dissuade from them, from this ideology. So you might be asking, well, then how do we reach them? Can they be dissuaded from their perpetual hate? Well, honestly, I don't know. Just like a religion, when you base things on faith and you don't base something on facts, well, it's almost impossible to change someone's mind. But what I can tell you this, whether or not these people can be reached, from a cultural standpoint, if you want to put an end to this kind of crap, then you need to stamp out the ideological viewpoints at the roots, meaning you need to start shaming those who participate in it. This will be a crucial tool in limiting the reach and growth for future generations, which if nothing else is worth doing. And we can see the left, by the way, they practice this. That's how you get things like the woke ideology, the shaming of people, the idea that if you disagree, you must be an ist or a phobe. And that's how they get people to change their minds. So perhaps we need to turn these tools on them. These people need to be shamed for their racism, for their ideological hate. Just because it's against white people doesn't mean that it's any less evil than if it were focused on the Black community or the Hispanics. That's it. If you participate in this kind of thing, you need to look yourself in the mirror and say, who am I? Why am I participating in racism, in hatred, in bigotry, in discrimination? And that's going to bring this episode to a close once more. From the To Be Frank show, I am Adrian. Thanks for watching, my friends. I'll see you all in the next one.